Hello, this is the second weekly update for Terrablox. Terrablox is a voxel-based virtual tabletop, with the idea being that because everything is voxels, it's very quick to draw scenes, it's very easy to make things like fog of war and vision and so on work, and you're not constrained by the art style of the game into a particular genre or even a particular scale. Um, there will be links in the description for where you can download the development copy, but please expect bugs. This is still pretty early in development. And in this video, we'll be covering some of the updates since the last video I put out. A lot of the focus has been on tokens and putting in features for actually running games and having tokens do all the different things you need them to do, chat, dice rolling, stuff like that. So let's just go and let's get into it because there's quite a lot to cover. So first of all is the little stat overlay for tokens looks a little bit nicer. It'll actually show a leader line up to their name. It'll show stats below that if the token has those set. If you have the token selected and you're allowed to edit this token, you also get these quick edit buttons for those stats. So you can quickly edit things like hit points or whatever you have defined without having to go into the edit dialog. If you have a condition like stunned or whatever, that will appear in that same list. Speaking of selection, you can also now select multiple tokens and then move them as a group. While you are dragging, you can use Q and E to actually rotate that group. And you'll notice that there's sort of a primary one here that's highlighted in gold instead of green. That's the one that kind of is centered under your cursor. So whichever one you select first will kind of move like the leader, and then everyone else will follow it. But they will individually snap to the ground and kind of do their thing. Another thing you could do is copy and paste tokens. So that should make it a lot easier to build out little groups of goblins or whatever. You can also now save tokens into the library. So if I take a token here, you can actually save it and put it in a folder if you want, give it a unique name, and then those will just kind of be in your, those are just saved out as simple text files into your user data folder, and then you can actually paste those into any scene across any campaign. So these are just like prefab tokens. Right now, there's not any that are built in, but I'll probably go in and do some basic ones like, skeleton, slime, stuff like that. Just some basic stock tokens for some of the images that I have. Separate from those stock tokens, there's also a new ability now for defining unique tokens. So if you have a token and you go into GM mode, you can let me show you one that's not unique already. I can go to this token and actually make it into a unique character. So what that means is that particular token, instead of just being saved into this current scene, actually gets pulled out separately in your campaign save folder as a text file that is under /characters, and you can actually paste that unique token into different scenes. And if you update stats in one place, it gets synced across all the different places it appears. It also keeps track of what scene it's, quote, supposed to be in. So basically wherever it was last edited or last unhidden, that becomes its current location. So when you load into a different scene where that token was already there, but it's not the current location, it'll be hidden by default so that you as the GM can decide whether or not they're actually still in this old scene. Speaking of hiding, that's also something that GMs can just do for any token. So you can hide tokens, and this means they are invisible from players, can't be moved, edited, whatever. They don't appear for anyone, even if they have permission for that team. So this is truly just hidden from the players. Only GMs can see them. You can use that for ambushes and so on. And that's, of course, separate from the normal team and vision system. So if you just want to have characters hiding behind bushes or whatever, there's already Fog of War and so on for that sort of gameplay stuff. So this is just for like, really, I don't want the players to see this token until I'm ready for it to sort of enter the battlefield. Let's see, that's unique tokens, token library. All right, when actually editing tokens, the layout for this dialogue is changed a little bit. It's in 2 different tabs now. One for the character. This is like notes, stats, conditions, stuff that might actually change from moment to moment while you're playing. You know, like whether or not light is on, whether or not the token's flying, and so on. Also, all of your stats, including the ones that are kind of semi-hidden. And then over in the setup tab, this is all your basic setup stuff, like what image is it using, how big is it, vision radius, light color, and all that kind of stuff. Images now are loaded with a little picker that has thumbnails, just to make it easier to find what you're looking for. And this is still just like some random stock art that I have in here. Of course, in the final release, there will be kind of a hopefully a more fleshed out set of different characters and different genres. But of course, the idea for this is because they're all just images, you can use whatever. It's very easy to import your own images and use custom standees. So if I wanted to change this guy to, I don't know, this tarot card, for instance, very easy to do. And I'm using pixel art in all these examples, but like I was saying last time, it actually does work with wide variety of different art styles and so on. So you can really customize these to the look and feel that you want for your campaign. I just happen to think that the pixel art looks pretty charming. There's a couple more options for setup in here now. So now instead of only having control over height and radius, you can actually choose a bunch of different shapes for the base of the standee. So you got like hexagons and triangles and squares and so on now. You can even do rectangles or capsules if you want to have oblong shapes. So if I want to make this guy like 5x3, you can actually get that kind of thing. If you're doing oblong, you probably do want facing direction enabled. So that means this token actually now has an actual set direction, whereas by default, you can see these guys just are always facing the camera, just a basic 2D standee. So this is more for if you have a system that really cares about direction, or maybe you're doing vehicles. So speaking of vehicles, there's also an option for you can set the standee to be top down, where it's kind of shown as a flat image instead of an upright standee. So that's pretty useful for vehicles, especially if you combine that with facing direction. So here I got a tank that I can kind of drive around. And then just to segue into it nicely, you can see that the turret is actually kind of a little bit higher and can be spun around separate from the token. So the way that is set up is this tank turret is actually mounted on the tank body. So there's a pretty complete mount and rider system now. Any token, you can go in and edit it. And then down here under ride slots, you can add one or more, kind of as many as you want, ride slots that other tokens can stick to. And the way these work is you just define where is the slot relative to the center of the token. So forward and backward, up and down, left and right, and so on. So the tank body just has a ride slot that is a little bit above it and a little bit back from the center. And then the tank turret is riding in that slot. There's also an option to lock it to the rider. So if you have things like tanks where you don't want to accidentally move the turret off and kind of have it go off on its own little adventure, you can mount it to the rider, and you do that by holding shift and then putting it on that slot. And then you can actually lock it to that slot to where now you can't accidentally move it away. Just to show a more kind of conventional example, here I've got a horse where it's got some ride slots set up. And if I want to have two characters riding on there, you can just have two ride slots and put one right, slightly behind the other one. Because these are all 2D standees, it can look a little bit weird as you're moving the camera around, kind of depending on how many sides the mount has and how big they are, and it's kind of depending on how you have the tokens set up and what kind of art they're using. If I actually turn off facing in all of these, so you can see they're all sort of like staying locked to the camera now. And Chrono is kind of floating around a little bit back there. But just don't worry about it. It's fine. These are meant to be very kind of abstract and easy to set up little standees, so you don't have to worry about learning 3D modeling or whatever, and you don't have to worry about setting up all kinds of complicated animations. So just tell your players, don't worry about it so much. A couple other options we can do for standees is you can go in and actually tint them to whatever the color is. So if you have characters that you just want to be tinted, or maybe you have black and white art, like white backgrounds or whatever, you can just tint them to different colors that way. Give you a little bit more control over showing a variety of characters or teams without having to create different images. Um, and then I don't know if this was in the last update, but I made it to where if as you're moving the token, it'll actually it's easier to show this on the horse here. It will automatically turn to face the direction of whatever way you're moving. But if you use Q and E to do a manual rotation, that will stick. So if you want to move them and actually rotate them to a specific direction, you can still do that with Q and E. And that works even if they're not moving. If you just highlight it, or if you just select it and then use Q and E, you can rotate it in place. And then hopefully these all still work in top-down mode. So when you're looking at tokens from the top down, because they are 2D standees, they would become invisible. So all of them shift over into just being 2D portraits if you're looking at them with a very steep camera angle, or if you use the literal top-down mode. And I think that's everything about tokens. So unique tokens, token library, blah blah. Oh, mounts and vehicles. Also flying tokens. So this might have been in last time, but if not, then it is in there now. So tokens can be marked as flying. While you're moving them, you can hold Alt and use the mouse wheel to move them up and down. You can see the little movement rollers are showing you the height at the start and at the end, but also as part of their movement, it's showing how much height they're gaining or losing. So here I'm moving this character up 8 feet, which means they'll be 13 feet over the ground at the end over here. And that's also showing that top-down tokens with ride slots make for pretty good vehicles. So this guy is just set up with a bunch of different ride slots. Oh, and something I didn't show earlier, each ride slot actually does have a facing direction. So if I put her here on the back, that ride slot is set up to be facing backwards, whereas these ones all face forwards. And that's just the default facing that the character will assume when you first assign them. You can still highlight that character and spin them around using Q and E, or using holding Alt and dragging the direction you want them to look. So that's a little bit easier to see here on this tank turret. if I drag it over here and then move the token around, the turret will, stay in whatever direction you set it. This drop line under flying tokens is optional. So obviously while you're moving it, the ruler will show the little drop lines so that you can see kind of where you are above the ground. But if you don't like this look of having them up on a line at all times, you can go into the options and you can disable that. So you can say, what's that? You can disable always show drop lines if you prefer that look of just having them be flying. The way flying works is generally it should do a pretty good job of kind of like going higher if it needs to, if there's ground in the way. But of course, let me know if you find any bugs. All right, moving over to props. So props are sort of like you can take sections of blocks and turn them into little objects that the GM can move around. So here I have some bushes set up as props and I can actually move them around in the scene. And then, of course, the lighting, because it's all ray traced, it's going to take a few seconds to update. So you don't want to move them around too often, unless I can get real-time lighting figured out, and fingers crossed. But this could be for, having little obstacles, barrels, and things you want to have the players, give the players the ability to move them out of the way without needing to go in and actually edit the scene. You can also set up animations for props, and this is intended for things like doors, elevators, things like that. You can take any prop and actually set a kind of second position that it'll move to, and then if I double click this, you can set where it goes, what rotation it ends up as, and then how long the animation takes. And whenever you double click it, it'll just sort of go back and forth between those two positions. So over here, I have like an elevator. And that will work with props that are riding on it as well. So you could have elevators, ferries, moving platforms, that kind of thing. You could also have over here, I've got some using that for doors. And then you also have the option to lock movement of these guys. So now if I click and drag this guy, I don't accidentally move it. Whereas over here, I can still move this door around, and I might not want that. The way that works is you come in to this edit dialog. So you hold control and click on the prop, you'll get this dialog. And this is where you can control what team is allowed to move them. So by default, it's just the GM. You can choose whether or not to lock it. And if you enable the duration down here, you can set where it moves to. So if I just I don't know, move it over here, right? I'm basically pasting where I want it to move to, and now if I double click on it, it just goes over there. So while you're doing that, you can rotate it, move it around. Oops, rotated it the wrong way there. So that's how you set that up. You're basically just setting what the alternate position is, and then the animation swaps back and forth between the two, with you being able to control the total duration in seconds. So if I want this to be a real slow door, I can set that to like 4 seconds. All right, so kind of moving over into more general gameplay related stuff. There's now a turn tracker. So GM can swap over into turn-based mode and progress through turns, or jump to any particular token's turn. And then you can drag and drop these to rearrange or use the little up and down arrows. Turns can either be token by token or they can be team by team. So you can some players prefer to do like players go and then monsters go. Some players prefer for each individual character to have their own turn, and you can do either one. While the GM has turn-based mode enabled, the only tokens that are allowed to move are the tokens whose turn it is. So if you're in team-based mode, then it's based on what team they're on. Or if you're in token mode, then it has to be, that token. The GM can move any token at any time, but if you don't have GM permission, it has to be the right turn, and you have to have permission to move that token. Also for gameplay stuff, there's a new in-game chat. So you can open up the chat panel, and if you type in this OOC tab, then it'll just be you using whatever you set your player name as when you joined. Or you can go into the in-character tab and actually select a token and talk as that token. And then there's the little notifications down here at the bottom where it'll show OOC or IC for out of character and in character, depending on what tab it's coming from. The in-character chat is also based on permissions, so you need to be able to select and edit that. You have to be an owner of that token in order to speak as it, or the GM can speak as any token. And then in both tabs, you have the option for who you speak to. So it can be everyone, which is the default. You can private message to just the GMs or any specific team. If I actually were online and there were players connected, you could private message any of the individual players. Or you can actually message all of the owners for a particular token. So if I just wanted it to be like, all right, this is a message for all of the players who have permission to move this token, you can do that. And that works the same in both OOC and ICE. So the only difference between the two tabs is who the message is coming from. Also in the chat tab is where you can now do dice rolls. So this is same syntax as like Roll20, where you're just going to roll dice in here, and then it'll show you exactly all the results and everything and the total. If I'm in the in character tab and actually select a character here, I can reference stats in my rolls. So I can be like, these characters don't have strength or anything set up, so I'm just going to use AC as an example. I can do 2d6 plus AC in square brackets. Oh, maybe not. Well, I guess that's not working yet. But hopefully that'll be working in the version you can download. Because all the stats are just numbers, you can just reference them as rolls or as part of rolls, and that should just kind of work. If you need to do secret rolls, you can either do the private message system, or you can just use secret roll or SR for short. And that will give you a roll that only you and the GMs can see. If you're the GM, then like only you can see it. And this is not logged anywhere. This is all just for the current session. Another system is notes. So if I open the notes tab here, these are notes that could be saved for the campaign, or you can have notes that are saved into this current scene. And these are designed, these are saved as just markdown files right into your campaign save folder with the idea being that if you open that folder in a tool like Obsidian, all of your notes should still work. And the formatting here is sort of based on how Obsidian formats things, including you can do wiki links. So if we do double square brackets, you can reference other notes and go between them that way. When you're defining notes, you can also put in permission for who's allowed to read it and who's allowed to edit it. So if you do want to have private GM notes, you can still do that. Or if you want to have notes that are only visible to specific teams, you could have monster notes and so on. Or maybe you're doing PvP, like a wargame kind of stuff, and you want separate notes for the different teams. Slightly related to notes, you can also, in GM mode, use this create marker tool to put markers into the scene. Markers can have a custom color and a custom label. So you can either just do a simple marker like this and just mark that location. The team is used to control who's allowed to see it. So by default, these are only visible to the GMs, but you could, of course, make markers visible to the players if you wanted to. And then optionally, you can put in a note name here, and it will show that note when you select or hover over that marker. And these are all still going to be clickable links as well. So it'll open the note in the note tab if you click on it. Let's see. There were improvements to rulers. So now if you're moving a token, it will actually make a ruler that follows the surface. So here, let me show you on this rock over here. So if I go over this rock, oh, that's kind of hard to see because it will show on this staircase instead. The ruler will actually follow that surface and figure out the correct distance for, moving up that slope or moving over a short wall, things like that. You can see this similar little drop line showing how much height has been gained. So this character is moving 16 feet, but also ends up 8 feet higher than where they started. If they are flying, then that's not going to be exactly the same. It's going to be just, straight line distance from their start to their endpoint, unless there is something in the way. So if I try to move this guy over here, it will actually move around this little roof here. So it'll still give you hopefully an accurate distance for like what would it take for this guy to kind of move over this building if he just went along this line. That's not always going to work exactly. So if you do an impossible movement, like maybe he moves inside here, it'll get a little bit squiggly. It might not always give you a ruler that makes sense because it's not doing any pathfinding or anything. It's just kind of avoiding obstacles along that straight line as best as it can. So if you really need to plan out a complicated movement and you want to know exactly how long it's going, there is still the ruler mode where you get this default straight line ruler where you just click 2 points and it gives you the exact distance between those 2 points. Or you can do a surface ruler that does the same kind of surface snapping as token movement. And if you hold shift and click, you set waypoints. So you can kind of do a longer, more complicated ruler that way. You can also do a ruler that acts like a flying ruler. So it stays at whatever height you put it and use Alt and then the mouse wheel to move it up and down. And then there's also a sphere ruler and the cone ruler, same as before, but now with just some quality of life improvements, like the cone ruler, for instance, moves out in a straight line from wherever you put it, and you can aim it up and down using Alt. if you need to aim it up and down. You can also do secret rulers. So if you toggle secrets, only you and the GM will be able to see whatever rulers you draw. And if you lock it, then that ruler will stay even if you go over into a different mode. And then let's see, a couple of camera options. So you can move around with WSA and D instead of only using the mouse. If nothing is selected, Q and E will rotate the camera. There's also options for field of view, as well as things like inverting the camera, scroll sensitivity, and you can swap middle mouse and right mouse button for which one orbits and which one pans. So by default, I use middle mouse to pan and then right click to orbit, but you can swap those depending on your preference. There's also a first person camera. So if I push F, then I'll switch into first person mode. Or if I select a token and push F, then I'll see from that token's position, whatever their eye height is, and so on. So you can use that to double check exactly what each character can see. And then, quick little, small change, but as you're moving tokens around, the camera will smoothly glide to the new position instead of just snapping instantly. Kind of related to the camera, you also have now an option to export. So if I go to images and then export, you can export the entire scene as an image, either in top-down mode or any of the 4 isometric directions. You can choose how many pixels wide each block should be and what color the background should be. You can either use the ground color or do transparent PNG, and that will actually export the entire scene as one big image to your data folder. So you could use that for maps or maybe just sharing your work, sharing examples of the scene. All right, moving over into build mode. A lot of changes here where generally the UI is just a little bit more cleaned up and consistent. The different tools will all kind of act the same way. They all do the same thing of you can hold Alt to draw from the center. You can hold Control to make them stick to a square aspect ratio. You can see now that it's also drawing with 2 colors. So all the different shapes will draw an outline in the primary color and then the interior using the secondary color. If you want to do hollow shapes, you can actually set the second color to null and you get that kind of thing. So you could use that to, quickly draw buildings, that kind of thing. There's also an option now for stipple. So if I make this short again, and then do like, I don't know, red and green as my 2 colors, right? I can enable stipple. And now what that's doing is instead of drawing an outline and an inside, it will just randomly assign a color to each block. And there's a control up here for you can control the density of like, you want majority one color or majority the other. That still works if you do null as one of the colors. So you can use that to kind of get randomly placed blocks. So that's kind of what I did over here to make this kind of like rough grass area. There's also an option now for snapping. So you can, here, let me come over here and draw a rectangle. So if I enable snapping and then draw over here, it will actually follow that surface. Oh, there's no inside, so it didn't. Yeah. So if I set the same color for the inside and outside, it will draw a solid shape like that. Depending on what you're drawing on. So the way that works is if it's in empty space, it will drop down to the ground. But if it's in solid ground, it will move up until it finds empty space. So depending on where you start drawing, it will do different things. So if I start drawing from the ground, it does that. But if I start from up here, then that acts a little bit differently. So just keep that in mind. Basically, what it's doing is it's dropping down if it's in the air, or if it's not in the air, then it digs up. If you want to make sure that it only drops down, you can use the build plane. So you can enable this flat build plane, put that up above the building, and now if I draw up here, it will drop down from above onto that scene. So that might be useful for things like maybe you draw hills using kind of a rock or a soil texture. And then maybe you draw grass on it by doing this kind of thing. And then that just follows the surface. The other new tool that I added is this pencil. So before there was just the single block where you can place it like that, but now you can also just kind of draw freehand, and that will follow the surface kind of in a similar way as the snap tool. That still responds to brush width. So if you change the width up here or the height, those will still kind of like take effect. And then now for the pencil and the single and line tool, you can use a circle brush as well. So by default, they are squares. But if I change this to circle, then I'll get a circular brush whenever I'm drawing with the pencil or drawing a line. What else do we have in here? Oh, the actual blocks now are drawn with a noise texture. So if I zoom in real close here, you can kind of see this texture, and it's randomized in a way that hopefully you won't notice any tiling. And then over in the scene settings, you can control the strength of how strong that noise is. So if you want kind of a smooth, cartoony look, you can do zero noise, or you can make that real strong if you want kind of a grungier vibe. While we're here in the scene panel, there's a lot of stuff added, such as you have some post-process controls here. So noise strength, like we just talked about, but then also things like, let me zoom out here. You can do things like control saturation, control contrast, control exposure for the lighting, as well as just brightness of the image. And you also have some render styles in here now too. So here's just the normal style where you're kind of getting like these very basic voxels. You can also do cell shading where the edges get these black outlines. So I'm calling this one soft cell shading because the lighting is still, kind of a bunch of different shades. But you can also do hard cell shading. And if I turn the noise strength down here, you can see all the lighting gets snapped to just a couple, specifically 5 levels. So you can use that to get kind of a more conventional cell shaded kind of look. You can also do these special modes. You can do blueprint, where everything gets colored according to whatever the ground color is set to. And then the outlines are whatever the sky color is. So if I set like I don't know, a gray ground and then maybe a white sky, right? You get this kind of like grayed out look, or you could do an actual blueprint. The lighting in the scene will still take effect. So whatever your color lighting is or whatever, that will still kind of like be visible. But you can also turn down the sun, turn down the sky, and then just put ambient lights if you want kind of a flat, unshaded look. Similar to Blueprint, there's also Moonside, where this draws all the surfaces as black, but then just gives you colored outlines. And those color outlines do still respond to lighting and so on. So if I look inside this cave, right, the color is still, it's not as easy to see colored lighting, but it is still technically working. So hopefully you could use that for some interesting kind of like very stylized scenes. Oh yeah, especially if you bump up saturation, maybe do higher contrast. Yeah, I don't know. I think that could look pretty neat. Let's see. Last thing in the scene panel while we're here is besides just the procedural sky where you have control over these different kind of colors for ground, horizon, and sky. You can also do just a flat color if you prefer that. It'll be just the ground color in all directions. And there's also a full fog version where the background becomes the same texture as the fog of war. And the reason you might want that is if you have fog of war turned on and you want players to be able to not be able to tell where the edges of the map are. You can do this, and now the fog for the background and the fog for the actual map will blend together and make the edges more ambiguous. So if I move to a different scene here, we can see that better. So here I've got kind of a, very traditional kind of dungeon where if I turn on player vision here, where is my player? Oh, he's hidden. There we go. So now, as a player, I can see where I am, but I don't have any spoilers for like where the rest of the map is, and I can only see whatever my token can see. So if you want to, with this system in place, it should be possible to have dungeons that your players could actually get lost in if they're not keeping good enough maps. Although, of course, you can still do this kind of thing where the areas out of sight are still partially visible. Kind of depends on the system you're running, depends on the kind of campaign you're running. Let's see, and then other than that, just to wrap up real quick, there were some more optimizations, and now lighting and fog of war should both update a little bit faster. Um, there's just kind of been kind of general UI cleanup, so hopefully everything will kind of like be a little bit more consistent, and it will work on a wider variety of screen sizes. So even if you're using a smaller screen, all this stuff should still work. It'll shrink or become scroll boxes if it needs to. Oh, and my last big thing is you can actually have a player camera set up. So as the GM, you can actually lock players to a specific view. So if I do set camera here, uh, I can actually lock players to where this is exactly what they see and they're not allowed to move their camera. So you can use that to guide them to points of interest or kind of show them little presentations or little cutscenes. And then optionally, you have this monitor window where you can just see what the players can see. Um, this is going to show you still like the GM view. So, like, you as the GM will be able to see all of the tokens and all of the vision from all the teams. So, this is not going to be the right kind of setup for like doing local play. If you want to do that, then what you want to do is actually have a second copy of the game running, joined as a player, and then you as the GM can kind of control that player view using this using this camera system, or you can maybe just depending on what your setup is, maybe you just go over to the player view and move that camera directly. So depending on if you have multiple monitors or something. And then let's see. Yeah. Other than that, it was just a bunch of bug fixes, little quality of life things, little things popping up where they shouldn't have, and things like that. So still expect a lot of bugs. This is like I was saying earlier, this is still really early in development. Um, but it is basically just UX. So I'm just working on features, playing around with it, fixing things as I encounter them that are either annoying or not working, or just seems like they would cause a little bit more too much friction for actually playing. But I'd be especially interested to hear if you do try running this for a game, or if you do try to build a big complex scene. What kind of stuff do you think could be easier, faster? Uh, what kind of stuff was confusing? And of course, especially if you find any bugs, please let me know. Um, but yeah, if you made it to the end, please check out the description. The current development version is available for download for free on itch.io. Um, Multiplayer is still LAN only, unless you can do port forwarding or maybe do a VLAN kind of stuff. Um, and if you build anything cool, please send me screenshots. I'd love to see people building stuff in this. If you made it to the end, thanks for watching.